Welcome back to the channel, Tommy with Elevation Every Weekend. In today's video, I'm going to give you my long-term one-year review of the Ibis DV9. About this time last year, Ibis was running a 25% off sale on most of their bikes and parts. So as a result, the GX build of the DV9 was available for just a little over $2,600, which is considerably less than the MSRP price of $34.99. So in today's video, I'm going to give you my impressions and experience with this bike's performance in a variety of ride conditions, and more importantly, I'm going to talk about how this bike makes me feel. Even though that may be highly subjective, for me it really does explain what makes this bike truly excel beyond the spec sheet. As for the specs, while I may touch on a few things in this video, I already did a deep dive on all those aspects in the first look video, so definitely check that out if you want to know all the numbers and parts spec for this bike. And as a side note, I did make one change to this bike, which took it from being already a great performer to making it feel truly special, at least for me. In 2022, I bought the Trek Procaliber, which is a carbon hardtail XC race bike, and it really did turn out to be a fantastic bike at the price point, which was a little over $2,200, and it's still a bike I own and ride all the time. The Procaliber has a more traditional XC geometry, and it only comes with 100mm of front suspension travel. And these are a few of the factors that led my interest to purchase the DV9, as it does have significantly more progressive geometry in the frame, and a number of other features that lead to a more capable trail spec overall. But the sale price was really the key factor for me to even consider this bike. So that, combined with the trail spec and a few other of the design features that I knew would give this bike a much higher ceiling than the Trek Procaliber, I decided to pull the trigger on it. As I talked about in my initial review, what I wasn't prepared for was not only did the DV9 deliver on the trail capability aspect, which I did expect, it had a swiftness and nimble ride appeal that surprisingly did beat out the Procaliber. So let's get into the DV9's overall performance. First, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the regular front range Colorado trail riding I do. Unfortunately, due to a really busy summer personally and some frequent challenging weather conditions here in Colorado, I didn't get to do all of the more ambitious trail riding I had hoped for. However, I definitely did enough to really get a sense what this bike can do. It really did just blaze through all of my local Colorado trails with no drama at all. It was stable and confident in rougher terrain, yet it was able to knife through the fast flowy single track sections with an ease that I had not anticipated. And again, that's coming from the already razor sharp handling that the Trek Procaliber possesses. I did get a couple rides in at a local bike park I like to go to, and the DV9 proved to be fast, fun, and ideal for that sort of riding. This is where I did have my first and thus far only crash on the DV9, where my front wheel washed out on a corner. At the time, I largely blamed this just on the front tire's grip, which I still may change in the future. But the change I actually ended up making to the DV9, as I mentioned earlier, not only made the bike feel much better for me, but I also think may have helped the front steering a bit. And that change was simply going to a longer stem on the bike. The DV9 came standard with an Ibis branded 50mm stem, and while this always felt good going downhill at speed, the bike just never felt as comfortable as it should have for me on a large size frame. I always felt a little more upright riding fast, flat terrain or climbing. So I ended up going to a 70mm long stem. And even though it's really a fairly subtle change, it was a proverbial game changer for me as far as the feel of the bike went, and it really seemed to make things click for me on this bike. It made me want to ride this bike even more in all conditions, instead of as previously where I was just using it for the more ambitious trail riding I was doing. So taking the stem into account, let's get back to some of the performance attributes. So next up is the bike's responsiveness. So despite having more front suspension travel, larger tires, wider wheels, and a dropper seat post than my Trek Procaliber, the DV9 still weighed slightly less. I also took note that the DV9 pedals extremely well. I think the power transfer is fantastic, which is largely due to the robust bottom bracket design, and that combination of lightweight and great pedaling made this bike really glide up the climbs. I also attribute some of this feeling to the Ibis wheels. As though these are the Ibis aluminum, more budget-friendly wheel set, they're surprisingly lightweight, and they spin up super fast when climbing or on fast, flat terrain. And this is also a nice surprise because they are a little bit wider 30mm internal width, which offers other benefits on traction and contact patch for more ambitious riding. And kind of beyond the responsiveness aspect, the climbing feel really was a huge surprise for me for this bike. As I mentioned, I fully expected it to handle the rough stuff much better than my Trek Procal, but I was also surprised that it beat the Procal on climbing and whipping it through fast, flowy single track. And that includes climbing and riding at elevation, where lots of pedaling is the primary aspect. As for the comfort, after changing the stem, the comfort and overall feel really did improve for me. I found myself selecting this bike to ride even on easier, more scenic rides So just easy single track, double track, or even dirt road riding. Things I would often use another bike for. And even though the DV9 doesn't have any fancy flex stay technology like the ISO speed on my Trek Procaliber or like Trek's new ISO bow frame design, the DV9 is still really comfortable. So much so that I'm still running the stock Ibis grips and the stock WTB saddle, which are usually two things I always change on my bikes. So to summarize my thoughts, everything I said about the DV9's performance in my initial review still holds true, but after many more hundreds of miles on this bike, the trail performance is still just fantastic. I'm still really taken aback every time I ride it about the lightweight, how the bike climbs, and the responsiveness at high speed. So let me talk about the future of this bike, as I definitely plan on keeping it long term. I'll say that Ibis's decision to spec the bike with a 120mm front suspension fork is pretty much spot on. That's enough travel to get a high degree of capability out of the bike, yet it still maintains that XC liveliness that makes the bike really good at high speed or easier terrain. One of the great things about this bike are options. Ibis says you can actually spec the bike down to a 100mm front suspension fork, which personally I don't really see any reason to do that. But the really cool thing is you can actually spec it up to a 140mm front suspension fork. And this change is actually really intriguing to me. I'm really curious as whether this bike with a 140mm front suspension fork and running larger, more aggressive 2.6-inch tires, which it can clear, if this bike would be next level capable on even more challenging terrain, but still maintain most, if not all, of the other bike's performance attributes. Let me know in the comments down below if this is something you'd like to see me try, as it is something I've been seriously contemplating for the 2025 riding season, as again, this is really that higher ceiling that this bike possesses than some other hardtails, like my Procal. So if you found this video helpful, drop a like down below, it really helps out the channel. And if you want to continue to follow my plans and progress for this DV9 and the other hardtail mountain bike content I do have on my agenda, subscribe now so you don't miss those videos. I have lots more coming, so stay tuned. Thanks a lot and have a great day.